Finland, a Nordic nation famous for its stunning natural landscapes and forward-thinking society, bordering Sweden and Norway with Russia to the east, Finland enjoys a unique geography of close to 200,000 lakes and sprawling forests. Its capital Helsinki sits on the southern coast, serving as the vibrant heart of culture and commerce. Home to 5.5 million people, Finland consistently earns its spot as one of the happiest countries on earth. Its recipe for contentment includes a robust social welfare system, world-class education and a close connection to nature. Some people say the sauna has something to do with it too. The country is also a hub of innovation, leading in technology startups and sustainable energy. But Finland's geography also places it at the center of geopolitics. Sharing a considerable part of its border with Russia, the nation has long walked a delicate diplomatic line. That all changed in 2023 with Finland's accession to NATO.
The longest European border with Russia has determined the history, experience and mentality of Finland and the Finnish people. The shadow of its powerful neighbor has kept Finland alert across decades, if not centuries. It took civil discipline of ordinary people, but also hard political decisions and compromises to defend and sustain the country's sovereignty. But it has worked. Recently, Finland decided to give up its traditional neutrality and joined the NATO alliance, something unimaginable just a few years ago. Tough decisions for hard times. What are the lessons from Finland for the rest of Europe?
Hello and welcome to Capital Questions. I'm Grzegorz Nawrocki. Since April last year, this place at Aalto University, just like any other centimetre of Finnish soil, is protected by Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. For the Finnish people, joining the pact was a historic decision, and for the rest of Europe, a major boost of the military potential in the Baltic region and beyond. Much to the discontent of the Kremlin. But what does it really mean, all for one, one for all? How can NATO protect us against new forms of war? And how can it protect itself against internal tensions?
For decades, if not centuries, Finland has maintained a delicate balancing act with its powerful neighbor, Russia. A hard but necessary choice, safeguarding Finnish sovereignty. After World War II, Finland confirmed its neutrality to avoid antagonizing the Soviet Union. This political tactic was called Finlandization, a term not particularly liked in Finland, but it enabled the country to maintain its independence and pursue a pro-Western orientation without provoking direct conflict. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, first in 2014 and the full-scale invasion in 2022, shattered the strategy entirely and prompted an existential shift in Finnish policy. In 2023, Finland joined the NATO alliance, a historic departure from military non-alignment. The past year has been a trial by fire. Finland has faced Russian provocations, including massive and organized migrant movements and attacks on critical infrastructure. All of that led to the closure of Finland's border crossings with Russia, a clear sign of the shifting relationship between the two nations. The Baltic Sea, described nowadays a NATO lake, is far from a safe haven. It remains a contested arena with Russian and even Chinese naval activity stirring the waters. Damaged undersea cables and gas pipelines have spotlighted serious vulnerabilities. Finnish officials called such incidents a new challenge for Western security. For Europe, the Finnish experience offers not just inspiration, but a blueprint for resilience in these uncertain times.
And in the first part of Capital Questions tonight, I'm joined now by Jukka Kopra, an MP from Kokoomus, a ruling coalition, and also chairman of the Defence Committee, Parliamentary Defence Committee, and Dmitry Quintus, Social Democratic Party of Finland, chairman of the party's European Working Group. And please join me in welcoming our guests tonight. Right, let's start with Europe before we go on to NATO. The former Finnish president and former leader of your party, by the way, Sauli Niinistö, in a recent report for the EU, is suggesting what Europe should do to remain secure, with very concrete steps like a spy agency, but also more general suggestions like change of mentality. Do you think Europe is ready to take these recommendations and this report seriously?
I think definitely Europe should take it seriously. Mr. Niinistö, or President Niinistö, underscored that we in EU and Europe have been accustomed to the peace, and we take peacetime as granted. But that's not self-evident. So we have to realize that we have to invest in our security, we have to invest in our defense to be able to guarantee stability.
This is why I'm asking these questions. Yeah. Do we really feel threatened to the extent of having to do something, especially as we have political turmoil in important European countries such as Germany or France?
Well, I think that if Russia attacking Ukraine, a sovereign European country, doesn't wake the Europeans, then nothing does. I think that the European Union and Europe as whole has three main security challenges or threats: Russia, Russia. And we need preparedness. We need.
Are we not too late by any chance? Because look, the EU defense secretaries.
We need more, definitely, but it would be false to say that we have done nothing right.
Perhaps you realize, I'm sure you realize, and you understand the threat. You understand it here in Finland. We do understand it in Poland, but it's not necessarily the case all across the European Union. How would you convince them?
Well, as said, if the war in Ukraine doesn't wake the EU and the politicians, then nothing will. And I think that the understanding what EU needs to do, support Ukraine, increase the military and economic support to Ukraine, and at the same time develop our own defense capabilities and technologies. It's something that people in Europe take seriously. It's just a question about what kind of political decisions we will make, and that comes to the economy.
And I agree with Dmitry on this, but also you can see that the further the country is from the Russian border, the less this is a concern for the country. And you can see this when you travel across Europe and discuss with different people. So what we need, us countries who are on the eastern border, Finland, Baltic countries, Poland, and etc., we understand that threat concretely and we realize it. And to my experience, I've seen that the more we discuss with the other countries, other European countries about this, the more we sort of open up the problems we have here close to the eastern border, the better the countries understand this.
When Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, says, as he did recently, Finns have reverted to the mindset of the early years of World War II, when they were close allies of Hitler. This is a very strong language. What kind of reaction does it spur in Finland? Is it fear or is it anger?
It's an outrageous thing to say from Mr. Lavrov, given the fact that it was the Soviet Union that attacked Finland in 1939. In other words, exactly the same thing happened to Finland as now happened to Ukraine. Russia attacking a sovereign European country, claiming that the smaller country would be a threat to the bigger country. It's rubbish, and
sure.
It's a shame that he's using this kind of rhetoric.
What do the Finnish people think when they hear these words?
I think that Finns are mostly deeply disappointed to the sort of lying that Russians have been doing, Finns can relate to Ukraine's situation very deeply because we have this mutual history or same kinds of events in our history, and that's why Finns are very much like wanting to help Ukraine also, and we have been helping them a lot in many different ways. But nevertheless, the sort of the cynical approach of Russia and their comments, their leadership's comments on the attack and different responses Finland or other European countries have been making just show us that they are sort of out of this world. They have their mind of their own. And actually, it's not only about Ukraine because they're threatening about everybody else too, and sort of building the enemy picture about other countries too, than not only Ukraine. So we should take this in that sense seriously, that Russia is persistent, long-standing threat to the free world.
A part of your defense strategy was to join NATO not so long ago. You're one of the newest members, and there's been enormous change in mentality and sentiment of the Finnish people, from about 20% for NATO. I remember just a few years ago when I spoke to my Finnish friends, they didn't want to be a part of the NATO alliance then. Now it's more than 60%, isn't it?
80.
Or even that.
Yeah. I mean, it happened overnight, and it's Mr. Putin who caused that with the attack to Ukraine. It did in many ways happen overnight, and I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that Jukka just described. Finland has experienced a brutal attack on our soil. Hundreds of thousands of Finns being victims of war, 400,000 people losing their homes from the Karelia, which was Finland before the Second World War. So people remember that, they know that, and nobody wants to experience that again. So in that way, becoming member of NATO was a natural step for Finland as a Nordic country, as a Nordic welfare state, which has all the time been going towards West.
Well, you're probably asking yourself here in Finland about the famous Article 5. What does it really mean for you? I know that we had this incidence of undersea cables being cut by, we still don't know. Well, by the way, do we have a bit more knowledge about who it can be attributed to, this incident of cutting undersea cables?
There's no possibility for definite attribution at the moment.
Where is, especially when it comes to the modern types of war, underneath the war level, what, in your opinion, would trigger Article 5, one for all for one?
That's a question of the day. What we see today, this hybrid warfare and stuff like that, Russia is openly doing in different countries. It's nothing new. They have been doing things like this before, through the course of history, but maybe not in this scale as in this moment. And I think that we in the alliance, in NATO, we should examine this more closely and sort of build up deterrence against the
if we got to know that it is the job of the Russians or Russians in cooperation with the Chinese, would that be just enough reason to trigger Article 5? Well, you were considering triggering Article 4, as far as I remember. That was in the news.
Yeah, Article 4 means consultant stations and so forth, and definitely I still stand behind that argument. We should, as the alliance, build up more deterrence for these hybrid activities and sort of have a plan, have activities in place that can be launched in case these events fold off.
Right.
But what is the case and when to sort of activate Article 5, that is something that we need to discuss as an alliance.
I'm not the one to start speculating about when to launch Article 5. I think the more important here is to pay attention to the fact that preparing ourselves, knowing all the time that the hybrid warfare by Russians and also others is a fact, especially by the Russians, and that's why the concept of comprehensive security that we speak about in Finland, hopefully even more so in the future, even more in the European Union and in NATO, is so vital. And I think that the report by former President Niinistö about our preparedness in the European Union is extremely important, and it's very actual at the moment.
How do you think the NATO will have to change? Have a look what the next president, American president, is saying about NATO, treating it really as a bargain, a kind of trade-off really at some point. Are you concerned what kind of shape NATO might take, or what needs to be changed to actually for this alliance to remain a powerful alliance?
Well, considering what Mr. Trump, the future president or president-elect of USA, has been saying, that Europe should carry more responsibility about its defense and spend more on defense. Well, I totally agree with him. We know that Poland spends a lot on defense. Finland's defense
coming up to 5%.
Yeah, close to 5%. Finland is spending this year 2.4% of the GDP to defense, but we know many European NATO countries are not spending that much, and we very much would like to see them reach that goal, and we can anticipate that possibly in the Hague top-level meeting next summer, the defense spending goal may be even higher.
Finland is a country of preppers. Some people say that is your society is very well trained to be prepared for all sorts of crises.
Well, that's a fair thing to say. I think that Finland chose wisely when we hang on to our military service for everybody, the compulsory military service for the whole population. That was wise, and I think that also shows in retrospective that we weren't completely blind to external threats. There was a reason why we chose to do like that. But yeah, I mean, it's important to be prepared. And there again, I would like to emphasize the concept of comprehensive security, where it's not only about defense capabilities, military technology, but also democracy, climate, transparency and social justice of the society.
Also, all sorts of challenges for the future. Yeah, security is becoming a major concern in international politics, obviously, and the Finnish people seem to be very well educated about it. We asked some of them in the streets of Helsinki what they do to prepare for a potential conflict, as they are encouraged to.
I trust the Finnish defense and everything. Yes, we are prepared.
We are strong enough with the NATO members today that no one can hurt us.
I am a former fighter pilot in Finnish Air Force. I flew MiG-21. Now I am retired and I trust our army. We have food and water for 3 days and underground shelters.
I guess we have always been here, and Russia has always been where it is now. So maybe we are used to things and have trust in that things will always work out somehow.
Now that we joined to NATO, that gives a lot of comfort to us also, and we know that we are not alone, since there are a lot of countries that share the same uncertain feeling.
I think that for now we feel safe, but I think that we also need to prepare ourselves somehow for the possibility of the threat of Russia. But I think that we now have maybe stronger backup.
And what is that backup?
NATO.
And for this part of Capital Questions, joining me, Teivo Teivanen, Professor of World Politics at the University of Helsinki. Welcome to the program. Dr. Sina Kokasari, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome. And Ville Skinnari, former Minister of Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade, and also Member of Parliament. Welcome to the program. Well, neutrality has always been a trademark of your country, of Finland. Your former president, quoted quite a few times already, told me this morning the risk of Russian aggression beyond Ukraine cannot be excluded. But in your opinion, how likely is it that Putin has already decided to go further? It's just he's waiting just for the right time.
Well, I assume Finland, having joined NATO, the risk of Putin attacking here has gotten lower. At the same time, perhaps the stakes are higher because now we are a frontline country. So in case of major war, there might be more destruction here. But the risk of attack itself, I think, is lower than before.
Well, perhaps 2 points. First of all, I think Finland hasn't really thought itself as a neutral country. We have always said that we are militarily non-aligned, and we are already members of the European Union since 1995. So politically, we are not neutral, obviously. But only militarily non-aligned. But that changed.
That changed, yes.
And then the other thing is that basically the Finnish army has always prepared for a war against Russia. That hasn't changed with NATO. That this is really the number one security threat that we are used to, and we have made our kind of preparedness plans. And that hasn't changed. But what has changed is perhaps the focus of NATO, that it has also realized that Russia is a major security threat for the whole of Europe.
So there's been a change in the NATO itself.
Yeah, I think that NATO takes now deterrence against Russia much more seriously than it did, for example, a decade ago, when it was more interested in, for example, civilian crisis management operations overseas. So that has definitely changed, and the focus is now much more on Europe again.
You're all experts on Russia living in this country. So what's next for Putin and for his plans, in your opinion?
What has happened during the last 2 years is pretty much what we saw under our government with the Prime Minister Sanna Marin's leadership, under the President Niinistö's leadership. Pretty much what we expected and what we are prepared for. So, as said here earlier, Finland is well prepared, and it gives you confidence. And when we joined the EU in 1995, it's been a long journey. It's been a journey for decades, if you like.
But look, I remember from some analytical sources that at the time when NATO was being enlarged by the new Eastern European states, you were also offered to join NATO. You didn't then.
Well, it was the majority of the Finns, and for instance, the party I represent, Social Democratic Party, we didn't see that momentum as the momentum for that.
Was this a mistake?
I don't think so. I think we have had great leaders since decades, as said earlier. I think Finland has always made timely, wise foreign policy, foreign and security policy.
Would that be a misjudgment then, so many years ago, when we were joining the NATO and you were still leaving out?
Well, at least I think it's an expression of times, clearly. I think even at the time when the Baltic states joined in 2004, perhaps the thinking in Helsinki was that that is a very good idea. We understand why they want to join the alliance, but it is, we are not in the same situation, and somehow that the Russian threat is there, but it is not necessarily primarily a military one. We need to be prepared, but we can probably still trust Russia as an actor, and we can manage the relationship and the tensions that are built in the Finnish-Russian relations by ourselves. But I think that then changed in 22, that there wasn't really a trust that we can really manage those tensions just by ourselves.
And sorry to interrupt, I just wanted to add that Sweden was the key. The Nordic platform was the key. The comprehensive approach was the key. And this is the most important for Finland, that we have this Nordic welfare approach, the comprehensive security concept, where Norwegian Prime Minister, Swedish Prime Minister, the Finnish former presidents, we all, including Denmark, That is our approach. Okay. And that includes the whole society, including education, including everything. As far as the approach.
All right. Okay, we've got a first question today, online question from Bucharest, from Romania. Let's take a listen.
My name is Luciana Alexandra Ghica, and I'm a political scientist at the University of Bucharest, Romania. Yes, that Romania that about a week ago cancelled its most recent presidential elections. It was the first EU country to do so for reasons related to alleged foreign digital disinformation and propaganda. Finland is often cited as one of the most resilient countries in the European Union, but also in the world when it comes to digital disinformation and propaganda. So as a scholar, but also as a EU citizen and citizen of the world, I would like to know what is the level of foreign digital interference in Finland during electoral processes, but also outside them, how Finland has coped with such issues so far, and which good practices Finland could share with the rest of the world so that we are all better prepared against such attacks on democracy, which are very likely to multiply.
It's really quite a problem concerning the whole of Europe, how easy it was to actually come up with this candidate. And it is a kind of war, isn't it? It's a hybrid war, really.
First of all, I think Russia's approach is really that it looks for our vulnerabilities. And if it sees a society where there are major fractions in the society, those are kind of entry points in a way for Russian influence. So perhaps my advice would be just to make sure that different groups within society are on board.
But have you diagnosed, by the way, in Finland, how many interruptions of this sort, if I can use this word, do you have in politics, in particular, in politics?
So do you mean like information, like disinformation?
Disinformation, especially referring to politics, not to science, but particularly to politics, trying to mess up your political system.
And that is interesting. I haven't seen any, so I can't really say that. To be honest, I think in a small country, in particular when we have such a strong consensus on security-related issues, it is not that easy. I think when it comes to Russian influence operations in Finland, I would say that at least earlier, before 22, perhaps the most efficient strategy for Russia to influence something in Finland was probably through carrots rather than sticks, in a way that offering good business deals or supporting NGOs or something like that, something that looks very benign from the surface. Those probably were better strategies. But when Russia has tried this kind of intimidation and kind of threats strategy, I think this is when Finnish people usually say, no, hold on, you know.
All right.
I still think the argument is sometimes used that there might be disinformation campaign that might be harmful. For example, there was a debate whether there should be a referendum about NATO membership. Maybe there was no time and there are other reasons, but one reason used was that if we have a vote, then Russia will have a disinformation campaign, and therefore that might somehow compromise the referendum, which I found a weird argument in the sense like, all right, so if we accept that, then how can we have elections at all if we don't trust Finnish people? There were other reasonable reasons for not having the referendum, but the disinformation argument is present. But I agree with Sinikukka that it's not really having an impact here. There's a lot of consensus on foreign policy issues and on Russia in Finland.
Yes, please.
I would underline maybe two facts when it comes to Finland, whether we talk about decision makers or academics. I think it's once again, it's the education level, that you do understand what's going on. You can really distinguish things. And the second is at the political level, as I said earlier, we are very unanimous in big things, traditionally in Finland. traditionally. But of course, if and when even Finland gets polarized, like this kind of a US phenomena,
and it is happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
It's happening everywhere.
If you look
it's
at
happening
our week this week in the Parliament, the last week, one should be concerned about the polarization of the Finns, and then of course, if the country is polarized, it's not strong. But as long as Finland is united,
that's a big question, but
that's
it's referring
a big question,
to all of Europe,
perhaps
even to the whole West. What to do about the growing polarization?
We have to really pay attention.
Okay, other than paying attention, do you have any ideas from Finland how to handle this? It's one of the greatest challenges and dangers to our democracies, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. I think the key is really to try to avoid kind of marginalizing any societal groups, that everyone should feel that they have a voice and a stake at building a society. Well, I don't know exactly. I'm a researcher, a very academic one, so I don't have the practical solutions, obviously, but this is the key really. And I think, for example, in many countries, Russia is really trying to kind of target, for example, minority groups that feel that they are not treated equally. So those are, for example, that type of entry points that I mentioned earlier. And it is really, it's not only that Russia is doing something to us, it is also that we are failing our own citizens and not kind of providing a forum for all voices.
And the polarization and impact of Russia might have different ways. One is, before, Finland used to be a country where most everyone would say, we are proud to be a country where we respect international treaties, human rights, rule of law, and that was the benchmarking. Now you hear a little bit more of the kind of benchmarking. If Russia is violating human rights, if Russia is not respecting international treaties, why should we? And this is a powerful political argument, not only of the fringe, but, for example, in the current government, it's not so uncommon to hear this line of argument.
But this is perhaps the price that we're going to, or we have to pay, to get more security. Your former president, Niinistö, told me, and it's actually in his report, that we need change of values in the European Union and in Europe, generally speaking. And perhaps one of those changes and one of those values that need reconsidering is security, but it's human rights, even immigration, immigrants, that's all on the table.
Yes, there's been flexibilization of many other values, including human rights and international treaties, in the name of greater security, and that's a difficult balance.
Ville?
Finland is still very committed to rules-based world. If you look at our government, the current government, former president or the new president. So let's make no mistake of that.
But what price are we all ready to pay for security?
And of course, it's easy to say that, okay, we can just pick up the rules, what we want to obey, right? But if we look at the big picture, if we look at the world with President Xi in China, President Trump in US, President Putin in Moscow, and if you look at Europe's situation and us as a Nordic country here, I think the first thing is to look at the rules-based world. And of course send a message as far as the European Union that we should be stronger. But if we undermine that short term, we will never reach that goal, what the professors had reached. I just visited China, for instance, with President Stubb. We had a bilateral with the Chinese president. I was very impressed how much China underlined the meaning of multilateral world. And if you look at the OSCE presidency starting next year here in Helsinki, I think it's an organization that if we didn't have that, we should establish it again, just to try to maintain the dialogue.
Let's talk about Ukraine a little bit, because we start thinking in Europe and elsewhere also, we start thinking about what's going to happen to Ukraine after the war ends. And one of the propositions on the table, and I think it was brought up by French President Macron, among others, would be this term that you probably don't like here. It's Finlandization, a kind of neutrality with political compromises that not everybody likes, but perhaps that would be one of the ideas for Ukraine after the war. What would you say about this political proposal?
I think it is something that Finnish people in general feel quite strongly about. And also to connect with your earlier question, for Finnish NATO membership, one of the issues was that why now in 22 the opinions changed and the elites changed. Yeah. And it was not only Russia, there was 2008 Georgia, there was 2014 Crimea, and Finns were happy not to be in NATO.
Absolutely.
One big thing was that in the elites and also among more people, there was this idea that they are taking away of our sovereignty to opt for NATO if we want. And that was very important. And now when they are suggesting in the name of Finlandization for Ukraine to forcibly or agree to not to have the option to join international alliances of their own choosing, be it NATO in this case, that makes Finnish people normally feel very uncomfortable, even though some may recognize it might be, a necessary sacrifice for stability or peace or something. But here it's felt quite strongly.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just continue that I believe that we shouldn't have kind of two set of rules for European states. One for those who are truly sovereign and can choose their own foreign and security policy. Another one for those states that have limited sovereignty and cannot do that. I think this is a very dangerous kind of security architecture for Europe.
It is, but it's real politics. It is real politics.
And then the other thing, yes, but then we have to accept that Russia will continue this war, and this is not a war that we want. So I think we should probably think about another way, another solution. And then the other thing is that also it wouldn't solve the situation, it wouldn't solve the war, because
perhaps it would stop it. Donald Trump says it would stop it.
No. It won't stop it, because Russia has never offered such a deal for Ukraine. Russia wants to subjugate Ukraine. And this is what the war is really about. It's not about the territory. It's not about NATO.
Right.
It is really that Russia feels that Ukraine should be in its sphere of
influence, yes.
And part of Ruski Mir, basically, and it is not a truly sovereign country in Russia's eyes.
So when you hear President Trump or J.D. Vance talking about a possible peace or armistice, whatever it is, are you worried?
Well, I mean, peace as such is something that we, of course, all want for Ukraine. But it shouldn't be peace at any cost.
Not on these terms.
Also, I think it is something that well, I mean, the US might think it's an okay solution, but for European states, I think we should be very worried. It is, after all, Europe that we are talking about.
How could Ukraine use the Finnish experience, the Finnish wisdom about Russia? The tough one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I know sauna and sisu is not enough as an answer. And you cannot copy-paste your history or your DNA, but you can copy-paste sovereignty by definition. I think that's what the colleagues already mentioned. The story of Finland, of course, it's something that during the last, say, 200 years, it's been something that how we made it ourselves and how we learn. But even
how could you treat it as a lesson to the post-Ukraine?
We had our internal things more than 100 years ago, and maybe we learned that never again ourselves. When you ask about the polarization, and hopefully we have also learned our lessons. But I would also come back to the EU context now, than the European context, and maybe even look at the Nordic examples for us, that how we build up the things decades ago with the Nordics. But absolutely, the EU must be stronger. The EU must be more vocal. And if you're not economically strong, how can you be, in the long run, strong as far as security? I think that's self-obvious. And that's something we have to understand, what my colleagues, Mr. Koppa, for instance, today illustrated, that we have to build up long-term and believe that we have a vision for that.
Do we have a vision for that? Because I do have an impression that with all the political conflicts within the European Union, we're actually far behind what we should be doing now.
I fully agree with you. If I look at the US, if I look at China, Russia, if I look at the BRICS countries, and of course, having served as a European minister for the last 4 years, I must say that we are too much entity-driven. We are not solution-driven.
Okay.
We are not as dynamic as the others, and that's something the new Commission should really understand, that we have to focus on implementation. That's the most important thing.
All right, so if there are any questions from the audience, then we'll be happy to. There's one over there. Let me just, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Declan, and I'm currently living in Finland as a racial minorities. In terms of out of my own personal interest, how far are the policies are making to protect the safety of those people who are not agree with the alliances of the dictatorship, and how far does Finland would have those kind of protection over racial minorities that would willing to be living in the democratic and free countries?
All right, thank you.
Of course, in Finland now, with something I've called flexibilization of human rights and rule of law in name of security, you can sometimes see that, for example, now the biggest question is probably in relationship with China, with what our president calls value-based realism, is where we have great values like human rights and all that, but in the name of realism, Finland deals with other countries, and that means and China is probably growing in importance, and the best example of that, where human rights are not perhaps emphasized that much by Finland. And the same thing with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with several other countries where Finland is not necessarily emphasizing human rights as much as some other European countries, like Norway, for example, not to even start talking about Gaza.
All right, okay. We've got another question, this time from Warsaw. It's an online question from Adam Jasa, former chief of Reuters bureau in Helsinki.
I would be interested to know how Finland is going to manage the need to spend more on defense and security with trying to keep fiscal discipline and economic growth all at the same time. What is the formula that Finland is going to adopt?
Very short question, but quite a tough one. Being primarily known as the subject of national security threats isn't exactly good for business. That's Elizabeth Draw from the Atlantic Council. How to square the circle? Yes, please.
Well, maybe I have to take a ball now. If Finland can provide ourselves with a 2% GDP growth per year, we can maintain our welfare society, what it is and what it has been. But if not, it's going to be complicated. But even when I was in Washington, D.C. last time, and when I explained our education system, our military service, the overall package, nobody is challenging our percentages. So this is not black and white percentage question. If Finland really opens up our portfolio of security, including our reserves, everything, I think we are performing as amongst the best ones in the world per capita. And therefore, I'm not worried about that. Once people get here and once they get to know. But I know that this percentage discussion is easy. But of course, we as social democrats, we are not willing to give up our education system, our social and healthcare system. We call that as a welfare society. And we also need diplomatic performance at the global level. It's not just military performance. And I think this is something what the professor just mentioned, that we have to, open new embassies globally. We have to really build up new partnerships at the global level. We just cannot narrow ourselves here if and when we want to catch that 2% GDP growth.
Is economy part of the price you have to pay to be secure, to keep the security? Maybe this is the new contract with our societies that we have to discuss. Yes, you have to lower your standards of living. You have to accept the fact for greater security.
To be honest, I don't think it works quite like that. It is true that there has been this kind of a shift, paradigmatic shift, definitely, and there is much more emphasis on preparedness, security, defense industry, for example. But, for example, if Europe would invest more in its defense industry, it's not away from innovations, quite the contrary, I think. So perhaps that should be also reflected in our innovation policies, so that we would gain from the shift, rather than that it would be seen in such a negative light as you described.
It's not me, it's the Atlantic Council expert.
Yes, I think it's obvious resources have alternative uses, and you put more there, you put less there. But what Sinikko was saying is true. Like, I don't know, internet was born out of some kind of Pentagon-related military thing, or China. I was a couple of weeks ago in China, and they have this security thing called facial recognition system everywhere. And now they're using it for facial recognition of insects to see how to, take care of their fields and what kind of insects are coming in. So perhaps this military and security innovation does have this sort of spillover effects to other places. But we have to be honest that if you put thousands of millions on airplanes, then it certainly means there's less money for something else.
And let's look at Europe. Let's look at European Union. What is the history of our consortiums? Airbus. Is that all? Pretty much. I mean, we should really wake up and start to really do M&As with innovations and really make concrete business industrial partnerships with the security. We talk about dual use, but in practice, we're not there. So we should really wake up if and when we want to perform. It's not just government spending money. We have to build up our own storyline, as simple as that.
Are we going to wake up in 2025? That's just an introduction to my last question. That's going to be quite a difficult year. What, in your opinion, will be the main challenges of 2025?
Well, Finland opened up the discussion that we should have a new fund focusing on defense investments under the umbrella of European Investment Bank. I think that's a good start. But once again, it's entity-driven. It's not solution-driven. It's not innovative. And that's why I think the heads of state should really work with the new commission, with the new decision makers further. And it has to be pan-European, as said here earlier. It cannot be driven by one single state.
There will be lots of issues, especially when when we have new American president, new issues for the NATO, new issues for Europe, for the European Union.
I mean, I guess it's not only for 2025, but overall, I mean, climate, security, competition, I think those are some of the things. But I think the thing is that in Europe, we often say that something is not possible because there is not political will to do something.
Which is quite right sometimes, yes.
Yes, it might be, but I think this is not the approach that we should take. It's much more that, okay, if, for example, there is not consensus within NATO or consensus within EU, let's start building it. And it is really up to, for example, the frontline states to advocate for stronger security policies and really make the case so that other European states will join us and will be on board in future.
Professor?
And for longer-term security, I think one of the biggest changes will be if we have the kind of government we probably will have in the United States, then in climate questions, Europe needs to take up a much more assertive role in defending some of the things done in Paris agreements and elsewhere. And it might mean also perhaps uneasy alliances with places like China and somewhere else that may actually see an opening there if the United States leaves that thing aside, and arguably for the security, the climate question is one of the biggest questions we have. Of course, if there's a world war before that, before, you know, the big climate scenarios, then that has to be thought about as well.
Well, let's finish, by the way, let's finish on a lighter note. For the 7th time running, you are supposed to be the happiest nation, the happiest people in the world. Can you reveal the secret? Well, you don't look like the happiest people in the world, by the way.
I don't know. I've been asked the same question all over the world. And we really studied that.
Tell us the truth, please.
I think the truth is that it comes back to our very basic things, back to basics, like we have free libraries, we have so many things that you can really enjoy in Finland as far as, once again, the welfare society. And I think that's something that at least...
So that's welfare system.
I think it's the welfare system.
Which is being strained all across the world.
As you know, we are not smiling that much, but I think at the bottom of our hearts
You're happy inside, okay.
But it's the indicators for those rankings are not how happy do you feel, because if that was the only indicator, we would be fairly low. But the indicators are actually about welfare society, like Ville was telling.
I would say that as a Finnish woman, I think something that makes me personally happy is the fact that in Finland it is possible to have a career and family life, and there is a good balance. And
life balance.
At least, exactly. So that is something that makes at least me happy.
All right, thank you very much for joining us at Capital Questions tonight. There's no doubt that Europe is starting to wake up, we've mentioned that, to the fact that peace cannot be taken for granted any longer. It's not happening to the same degree everywhere, but it is happening. And Finland is an excellent example for the rest of Europe. NATO enlargement is changing the geopolitical and military situation in the Baltic region, but it remains to be seen how and when this will change the mindset of the Europeans. And quite frankly, that's a key issue. Thanks for joining us at Capital Questions in Helsinki. For more news and analysis from across the region, please follow us on tvpworld.com. Till next time, good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.